God is dead is a sentiment shared amongst many people who find themselves in a world dominated by so much selfishness, in a capitalist society where the weak only serve the interests of the strong, where what is legal is not always moral, and what is moral is not always clear. And it's these themes that work at the core of Crime and Punishment, and lead our hero Raskolnikov to assume the role of judge, jury, and executioner in God's absence. But as he and we will learn over the course of 500 pages, this undertaking has grave consequences, not just for himself, but for all of humanity. So join me for another caffeinated critique, where today we discuss Murderers and Martyrs, and the difference between a great man and a good one. But before we get into all that, let's take a moment to break down some of the philosophical and historical context surrounding this book. Yay! Because many people think that Crime and Punishment is just about nihilism and Russia, and it is. But it's important to be clear. This book is about Russia in the 1860s, a time marked by the rise of industry, by the rise of capitalism and rational self-interest. And at the same time, you have various democratic reforms going on, the most notable of which was the emancipation of the serfs, which granted freedom and the right to own property to millions of working-class Russians. But of course, freedom is never free. This came with a cost, tremendous amount of debts, and absorbently high interest. Which is why you see so many people in the book struggling to make ends meet. There is an ever-widening gap forming between the rich and the poor, and also the old and the young. This generational conflict is not only physical, but metaphorical. Throughout the book, our hero turns to various father figures for guidance: Marmeladov, Porfiry, Svidrigailov, and of course, God the Father. Yet, in so many of them, he only finds reflections of his own sin. At times, it seems like the sons must pay for the sins of the fathers before them, or, as Raskolnikov believes, to destroy the old word and establish a new one. And finally, this brings us back to nihilism. God is dead, but many people don't know the full quote. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. Nietzsche goes on to explain that as the murderer of all murderers, we must become gods ourselves to comfort ourselves in his absence. Encasing ourselves in kingdoms of concrete, waging war against neighboring nations, worshipping the almighty dollar. Are we really worthy of a title? Raskolnikov believes himself worthy, but he loses faith in both himself and his philosophy as the book goes on. For a clearer picture of the superior man, look to his best friend, Razumikin. Equal parts clever as he is kind, watch as he easily dispatches both the landlady and the maid with charm and flattery, whilst Raskolnikov isolates himself further, slinking away from confrontation like a coward. A man who, despite equal economic circumstances, rises above them, and does propagate a new word in the form of book translations and publishing. In fact, Razumikin serves as a better representation of Russian nihilism, which was a progressive movement rooted in the negation of social norms or ideals in the form of promoting personal autonomy. The Russian nihilist does not believe in nothing, but rather they've lost faith in the autocracy that oppressed them for so long. I've linked a full essay about it in the description. It's very interesting, and I don't know if I have enough time to talk about it here. But with all that being said, let's actually get to the book. In 1860s Russia, we enter the world of a man plagued by his own incompetence. Raskolnikov spends all day cooped up in his tiny apartment, deeply in debt and brooding over an idea that's been gnawing in his mind for months. The idea that the world will be better off without some people in it. That a man, a superior man, could cross all moral and legal boundaries without batting an eye, if his deeds were done for the salvation of others. And though his conscience weighs on him, he's presented the chance to test his theory in the form of an old pawnbroker woman. She's selfish and greedy and abusive to her stepsister, who is kind and meek. And she's also rich. Raskolnikov believes she would be missed by no one, and he can take all her money and use it for good. And though at first he cannot go through with it, he convinces himself that he has no choice. That what he will do cannot be considered a crime, if it's done for the right reasons. But everything goes wrong. The innocent stepsister comes home at the worst possible moment, and Raskolnikov must take her life in order to save his own. And for the rest of the book, he is racked with guilt and uncertainty. Was his theory wrong? Was he not a man? Is a man capable of change? This book is about one man's transition from one world to another, his growth and his decay, and his transformation from a vile murderer to an honest man. Dostoevsky is a master at painting the portrait of a man wrestling with two sides of himself, a good heart and a cunning mind. I should have known, he thought with a bitter smile. And how did I dare, when I knew myself, when I had the feeling, take that axe and shed blood? I should have known beforehand. But I did know beforehand, he whispered in despair. At times, he would linger motionless before one thought or another. No, such people aren't made like that. The real master to whom all is permitted storms Toulon. commits a butchery in Paris, forgets an army in Egypt, wastes 500,000 men on his Moscow campaign, and gets off with a punt at Vilna. And when he dies, they dedicate monuments to him, so it follows that all is permitted. No, it's clear. Such people are made of bronze, not flesh and blood. We're told only what we need to know, and we're left to judge the characters for ourselves by their actions and intentions. Often in life, we split people into binary categories, strong and weak, good and evil, but a key takeaway from Crime and Punishment is that people are so much more than that. A good man can hurt people, just like a bad one can save them. Raskolnikov, despite being a murderer, is actually one of the most compelling heroes I've ever seen in fiction. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say he's an anti-hero, given his misguided philosophy and mistakes, but he has a good heart. He sees beggars in the streets clamoring for even a small bit of change, and he feels the weight of all their cries. He feels responsible to help them in some small way, but he can only do so much. His impotence drives him to the point of insanity, and he abandons responsibility and accepts depravity. Towards the end of the book, he seeks out the company of Svidrigailov, a man who Raskolnikov sees as a vile beast and harbors no remorse for his actions. This is who Raskolnikov can become, who he's on his way to becoming, if not for the love of his family, his friends, and Sonia. However, it's evident by his acts of charity and many nightmares that Svidrigailov is actually haunted by the things he's done. And it's through him that our hero is offered a chance to start a new life with Sonia in Siberia. But Svidrigailov himself does not find redemption, because he is unwilling or unable to confront the reality of who he really is, and abandons his responsibility to change through suicide. Raskolnikov must learn that strength does not give you the right to rule, it gives you the responsibility to serve. We must be honest with ourselves and confront the consequences of our actions, despite our intentions. And we must learn to be honest with others. Raskolnikov isolates himself constantly throughout the book, turning his back on his family, his friends, and even his God. He clutched a coin in his hand, took about 10 steps, and turned to the Neva, facing in the direction of the palace. There was not a cloud in the sky, and the water was almost blue, a rarity for the Neva. Often, when he had been attending the university, most frequently on his way home, he would stop at this very place to have a good look at the truly marvelous view. And every time that single unclear and unresolved impression of his would take him almost by surprise, the marvelous view always left him with an unexplained chill. The extravagant panorama seemed to have a soul that was deaf and dumb. It struck him as almost funny, and at the same time it weighed on his chest till it hurt. In some depth below, somewhere far beneath his feet and barely discernible, stirred all the life that he had lived, the thoughts that he had thought, the business that had kept him busy, the subjects that had concerned him, the sights that impressed themselves on him, and the superb view and he himself and everything. He seemed to be flying away somewhere, higher and higher, and everything was disappearing before his eyes. His arm made an involuntary gesture, and he suddenly became aware of a 20-kopek piece he had been clutching in his fist. And clasping his hand, he gazed steadily at the coin. Then, with a sudden movement, he flung it into the water, and he turned around and went home. He believed that his sin separates him from humanity, but what he doesn't realize is that it makes him all the more human. After all, who among us is without sin? It is only through love, and not condemnation, that we are given the chance to be more than our mistakes. We must come to realize that you do not deserve love. You are loved, and what you do with that is your choice. Many people take credit for all the good in their lives, and blame God for all the bad. But we are each given the gift of free will, and what we do with that is our choice. We cannot blame God for the wickedness of man. Evil is a choice, but we also have the choice to be kind, to look upon our peers not with judgment, but with love and understanding, especially when they don't deserve it. Because who are we to judge? To play jury and executioner to our peers. We are all just people, striving to do our best. She always held her hand out to him timidly. Sometimes she didn't even hold it out at all, as if she were afraid that he might reject it. Now their hands did not separate. He looked at her swiftly, said nothing, and let his gaze drop to the ground. They were alone. Nobody could see them. The guard had turned away. He did not know himself how it happened, but suddenly something seemed to seize him and hurl him to her feet. He wept and embraced her knees, and at first she was terribly frightened, and her face turned completely pale. She jumped up and looked at him and shivered. But at the same time, at that very moment, she understood everything. A boundless joy illuminated her eyes. She understood, for there was no longer any doubt that he loved her. He loved her infinitely, and at long last the moment had come. They both wanted to say something but could not. Tears came. They were both pale and thin, yet in those pale, sickly faces there already glowed the light of a new renewed future. Resurrection to a new life. Love resurrected them. The heart of one contained infinite sources of life for the heart of another. So, to the self-proclaimed nihilist who believes in nothing, believe in love. Believe in people. They just might surprise you.